When it comes to making adjustments to your animation, there are some things you can do to make the process a lot easier. One of those things is knowing exactly which controls you're using for what and limiting how many controls you're using in general. This isn't really something you can adjust later on in the game if you've already animated a whole thing and you're close to polish and you've used lots of controls. Ideally, you're getting feedback early and often, and you can address these things before they become too much of a problem. But this is going to tie into your overall workflow and the overall way you choose to work with certain characters. It's part of your setup process and your planning, and you don't want to skip it for this reason. So if we look at this character, this is just some character from Mixamo. It's just some mannequin dude with a rig from M-Gear, which is a free rigging framework. It doesn't matter what character you're looking at because most rigs are very different. But what I want to point out is that all of these different controls, if I hide the character, there's a lot of options. There's a lot of things to mess with, and guaranteed yours is going to look a bit different than mine. However, some things I want to point out are that the color coding you often see in the torso is not an accident. In a lot of rigs, you actually have a few sets of what we almost would consider redundant controls, things that seem like they do similar things to other controls on the rig. Why are there so many that do similar things? Well, in the same way that you have an FK and an IK set of controls for the arms or the legs, we also have FK and IK torso controls. The red ones in this particular case, if I select it and go to the top right corner, I can actually see that it says spine, C0, FK0 control. One above that, FK1 control. It's an FK set of joints because they're meant to be rotated, and I would kind of move up through the chain and bend the torso. But then these yellow ones, you'll notice that they aren't really moving around as I move the red controls, right? So even though I'm moving the torso, this other torso control, this big yellow one here, it totally got left behind. What's the deal with that? Because it's an IK torso control. It's like a different setup. Now, the torso is a little bit different than the arms and the legs. Typically with arms and legs, you only use IK or FK in a given moment. But when it comes to the torso, you can use them interchangeably as a group. You can mess with different things. But what you should do before you start animating is learn what they do and decide what you want to use them for. Because you have your main body control here, but inside I actually have an IK hip control that can be used to translate and rotate the character. It's great for cartoony animation to be using this all the time. It's not that you wouldn't use it for realistic stuff, but you just might have a different way of going about it. Same thing in the torso. I've got this rotation control that's also meant to be translated. And the reason that you could just use these yellow ones is because by using the two of them in conjunction, it will reshape the spine without ever using these red ones. The point is that it is a decision that you should be making. And there are plenty of other tools at your disposal, especially in Maya. One of the reasons that people use it for this kind of stuff is because of how many options you have to work with. One of the workflows at Sony Animation, for example, Hotel Transylvania, Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, Spider-Verse, you know their work. A lot of the really cartoony movies that they've done, like Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs or like Hotel Transylvania, they'll have these really specific, graphic, 2D pushed poses in their 3D models. And they're not accomplishing that with their character rigs. And so sometimes it goes beyond the rig itself, and it's actually deforming the mesh using what's called blend shapes. If I select my mesh, I will go up to Windows, Animation Editors, and there's a window in here called the Shape Editor. In here, I can actually create a blend shape, and if I add a target, it gives me the ability to modify the mesh itself. So I'm going to turn off my animation controls, and I'm going to use just sculpting tools or modeling workflows. And I'll just go to the sculpting menu just so I can show you a fun example. If I were specifically trying to maybe change the curvature of this kind of inner torso stuff, I want to just smooth it out, I want a really soft line, I could just use a smoothing brush. And I've gone outside of the realm of animation here, but if I'm given a note on the posing and I can't accomplish it with regular animation means, sometimes in studio workflows and freelance projects especially, you might need to resort to non-animation solutions. And so with this blend shape activated for this particular mesh, I can go in here and I can actually just shape it up. I can get rid of those nicely defined abs, get rid of some of this definition in the chest, and I'm literally just smoothing the mesh. Now, if I go too much, I might turn off editing mode, and I can now have a slider that reactivates that definition. And I can always make additional adjustments. If there's something wrong with his back, and maybe from this particular angle, we don't want this dip, we want to have just a really smooth surface of the back, I could add an additional target. And now this one's being edited, and I can say, all right, let's use another sculpt tool. These are not huge fixes to the animation, but they're things that are going to define how we work with our character. If your controls can help you do it, great. If they can't, this is another really cool studio-based workflow. This is a late in the game technique, and I can key this as well. And these are some really cool ways to adjust our animation for all kinds of different workflows, especially professional ones. This can help you hit very specific shapes to really define a character and define an emotion, the body mechanics, to make it look a lot more interesting and that much more memorable to help you get a job or your next client project. Now, 2 other quick tips I want to leave you with here are the FK and IK workflows of arms and legs and your curve hygiene overall. Curve hygiene we'll start with, it's what I'm referring to is the graph editor. Go ahead and switch all this back. The graph editor is your friend. I've said it before, I'll die on this hill. It's a great tool. I recommend always having this open somewhere. It helps to be able to see, oh, interesting, this down position is a lot lower than the other down positions surrounding it. When you're given a note and you're told, for example, again, hey, have them jump in the air. I know exactly which curves to use to do that because I've been watching the curve editor evolve throughout the process of animating. And so it makes a lot of sense. And I'm just like, oh yeah, I need to make them go higher. Great, that's my translate Y curve. Here's what it looks like. These are the curves I have on it. I know what they do. And I know that if I scale these curves up, just kind of drag the whole thing, and now he goes much higher, I immediately go, well, he definitely goes higher, but now his feet are hyperextending, but I know what to do there too. So here we have him springing up into action, and this is where the FK and the IK stuff comes in. I have the character with FK arms, meaning that the entire time I'm animating him, the arms are rotation-based. But the moment I have him hit the ground, when he pulls his arms here, wham, right there, I actually switch the hands into IK. IK is the other system where I can place the hands in a specific spot, and if I move the hips, they now act like the feet. The hands and the feet are both in IK, meaning the body and the hands and the feet are all independent of each other and they lock into place as best as they can. You can see they kind of break if I get too far away. But doing that kind of a change adds complexity to when I need to start making larger adjustments, because to having him scramble and try to get up in a different way, I now have to manage not just the IK skeleton that I just showed you, I also have to manage FK skeleton keys, which, for example, this little arm cage, as soon as he switches to the other mode, where's that arm cage? It disappears. Because when you switch from FK to IK, the controls that are visible often change. So I now have to manage controls that disappear. So I need to make sure that I select the ones that I can see, the elbow and the wrist as an example. And I gotta scrub back over here. And I need to also add to my selection the shoulder, the arm, the forearm, and the wrist. And on top of that, whatever control it was that actually did the FK-IK switching, which in this particular rig is like way back over here towards origin, there's this little thing right there, which I can zoom in to show you. It's this little X. This little X is the thing that actually has the FK-IK blend control. I have to grab all this stuff in order to set my bookends and make adjustments. So for large changes that have more complex rig settings involved as well, don't forget these types of things. And what you can do so that you don't have to keep selecting this every single time I want to adjust these things, if I need to keep changing my timing, selection sets are your friend. Personally, I use AnimBot. AnimBot is a collection of tools in a script that you can get. Basically, you can create for yourself a way to hit one thing and it reselects everything I've just done. In the script editor, bottom right corner of Maya, there is a log of everything I've been doing. You can see that I have all these different selections of stuff. And there's also the frame count that I've been going to. We're gonna ignore those. But if I just say, hey, all these things I was grabbing, I'm gonna copy that. I'm gonna paste it into this little Mel scripting window. Make it big so you can see it. And you can see that we have a selection of an arm FK control. We changed to the frame. I'm gonna get rid of that. We don't need that. This one as well. Typically, if I'm doing all my selections, I'm trying to grab them all, you need the last one that has the -R, because it basically deselects everything else. It's, I want you, bam. That's just how I remember it. It's my mnemonic device. But I changed this, which is why I know it's the last one in the sequence, because when I clicked this, and then I clicked this, and I clicked this, it was deselecting the ones before it, so I know that these aren't selected anymore. I changed them all to toggle, but this whole set of things right here should be everything I need. This is the entire right arm. I will click this little button right here, which looks like a floppy disk on a shelf, and I'll just call this arm right, and hit OK. Now you can see I just created a little button up here on the top of my shelf. Once I click this button, boop, it actually grabs all those things all over again. That is a huge time saver to be able to reselect stuff that you need to be adjusting keyframes for, moving things around, or dealing with bookends. Let me show you what it looks like after we've made our changes. So here we have our run, we have our dive, and instead of popping into the air, we have a little bit of a scramble and kind of this half hop to get back to our run cycle. But that is how you can take something that you've already put a lot of work into and sort of just build off of it, and while sticking with things like the core, the root, the main big parts of the body, just start layering in what you want to happen piece by piece until eventually it starts to resemble something new that still feels connected to the overall animation. If you have a piece of animation that you've already animated that this works for, and you can like chop out a section, do the bookends, and make adjustments using this layered workflow, great. Do that. But if you don't have a piece of animation that really fits this mold where you have something where you can make an adjustment, maybe all your shots are pretty straightforward and you don't really know what to change. In that case, I would say start off from scratch. Open up a blank scene, bring in your character. Take a minute to evaluate the actual controls you want to use for this before you start. That's one of the things we talked about. And what I'd like you to do is have two poses, an A and a B pose, a standing pose and a sitting pose. Just make a cube as your chair. Don't worry about downloading models or making it complicated, but just have your character sitting and standing. The order is up to you, and just figure out just with the hips, just the main hip control, the overall motion to have the character sit down or stand up. Think about the weight shifts, think about where the character's balance is. If they lean forward, they can't just fall forward. They're gonna have to compensate by changing the translation as well as the rotation. And then just start adding detail. Do you want the torso to drag behind? Do you want it to lead the action? If you're sitting or standing first or second, that might change your answer. But try that process as if you had other stuff on the outside. So give them a prop, give them something to hold if you wanna make it more complicated. But regardless of what's on the outside of this imaginary shot, or if you're using a shot that you already have, in this window where you have two different poses, figure out how to get from A to B in a new way. Or if it's from scratch, just by using this particular workflow, and see how it goes.